Hello everyone, welcome back TV Spoilers. Young and the Restless reveal that beneath the polished glass towers and power-saturated boardrooms of Genoa City, family tension and corporate scheming had been building for months. And now it finally hit a breaking point. The war Victor Newman was waging against Jack Abbott and Jabot was never just business. It was the latest chapter in a long, bruising history between two dynasties that had spent years alternating between uneasy cooperation and open destruction. Victor moved with cold precision as if each strike was designed not only to weaken Jabot, but to test how much pressure the people around him could endure, especially Nikki. And Jack, caught in the eye of the storm, found himself trapped between defending his company and absorbing the personal fallout from a battle he hadn't fully wanted, yet could no longer step away from. Diane Jenkins Abbott felt the strain more sharply than anyone. Jack's loyalty to Nikki, rooted in a complicated, decades-long bond, had become a constant irritant. Then a threat, and finally an unbearable line Diane refused to let him cross again. To her, every move Victor made wasn't merely a corporate tactic. It was a direct danger to the life and stability she was fighting to protect. Diane had watched Victor prove, time and again, that he would sacrifice anything to win, even the foundations of his own marriage. She could not accept Jack standing close to Nikki while the storm intensified, because she could already see how easily Victor's wrath could spread outward and swallow anyone near his target. Her patience thinned day by day, worn down by Jack's hesitation, until she finally forced a boundary into existence, knowing it might crack the very future they were trying to build. Jack, standing at the center of it all, began to feel the weight of a decision he could no longer evade. His friendship with Nikki was not something he could discard with a single clean gesture. It had been forged through years of shifting alliances, shared losses, and moments when they had saved each other from their worst impulses. Nikki was not simply Victor's wife or a convenient ally. To Jack, she was someone who had witnessed his weakest hours, understood his bitterest failures, and stood with him when victory came at a cost. But when Diane looked at him with the exhausted eyes of someone pushed to the edge, Jack realized that holding onto the past exactly as it had been was no longer harmless. Every time he defended Nikki, every time he aligned himself with her against Victor, Diane felt their family being placed closer to the blast zone. Diane's ultimatum didn't arrive as a sudden outburst. It came like the inevitable result of long nights, silent fear, and patience stretched past its limit. She demanded Jack stop supporting Nikki in this war, and put their family in Jabot above everything else. For Diane, it wasn't jealousy or possessiveness. It was survival. She believed Victor would not stop until he got what he wanted, and anyone who stayed near Nikki now risked becoming the next casualty. Jack tried to explain, tried to shape his loyalty into words that wouldn't sound like betrayal, insisting that his bond with Nikki wasn't a rejection of Diane. It was part of who he was. But even sincere words couldn't fully quiet the rising dread in Diane's chest. The pressure settled on Jack in a way he rarely experienced. In business, he had always been able to make hard calls, accept risk, and endure consequences. But this choice was different. It wasn't about stock prices or leverage. It cut straight into the relationships that defined his life. Jack understood that whatever he chose would leave a wound behind. He just didn't know how deep it would be or who would bleed the most. He sought advice from someone close, hoping for clarity, but the more he listened, the more he realized no one could decide this for him. Everyone viewed it through their own lens, their own loyalties, their own fears. In the end, Jack remained the only person who would have to live with the aftermath. When Jack finally faced Nikki, he tried to hold steady. To be honest, without letting the truth become a weapon. He didn't want to damage a friendship that had survived so much. Yet he couldn't ignore the reality that everything he did now was being watched, judged, and potentially exploited in the Newman-Abbott war. Nikki, already struggling with the fractures Victor's actions were carving into her own marriage, felt Jack's hesitation like a quiet betrayal. She saw Diane's influence as manipulation, as a deliberate effort to pull Jack away from her at the moment she needed him most. Nikki's disappointment didn't erupt into rage. It hardened into something colder, a distance that left Jack even more torn apart. Slowly, Jack came to understand that his desire to keep everything intact was an illusion. He could not stand beside Nikki against Victor and still give Diane the absolute safety she demanded. Every path he considered required a sacrifice, and the future of his marriage, his company, and his own sense of integrity depended on which loss he was willing to accept. His hesitation only made the chaos worse. And he knew that refusing to choose was still a choice he owned that could cost him control entirely. When Jack finally made his decision, it did not feel like victory or relief. It felt like quiet surrender to the truth that consequences were coming, and he would have to meet them without any guarantee he had chosen the right road. The tension remained thick and unresolved. Relationships hung in the balance between trust and suspicion. Even Jack couldn't be sure whether what he'd done would bring stability or ignite a new spiral. And somewhere beneath the thoughts he couldn't quite say out loud, the real question stopped being who he had chosen, and became whether he would still recognize his life once that choice began to reshape everything, in ways no one could predict. On our TV Spoilers channel, I'm always looking for content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting insights. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series. Jack's hesitation day after day, decision after half measure wore Diane down in ways she hadn't expected. At first, she tried to reassure herself that his caution was strategic, that he was weighing the long game to protect Jabot and their family. But the more she watched Victor keep pushing forward after the double cross, the more she saw Jack stall when clear chances to strike back appeared, the more a deep unease began to seep into her. Diane wasn't simply frustrated that Jack wouldn't move aggressively enough. She was shaken by the feeling that she was being left exposed in a war that directly threatened her future. For her, this stopped being about patience or faith. It became a question of survival if they kept waiting. What would still be left to protect when Victor landed his next blow? It was in that state of exhaustion and growing doubt that Diane crossed a line she once swore she would never touch. Approaching Phyllis Summers wasn't an impulsive act, it was the result of nights of conflicted, relentless thinking. Phyllis was her sworn enemy, the embodiment of bitter memories and wounds that never truly closed. And yet, with Victor still calmly manipulating the board from the shadows, Diane was forced to admit an uncomfortable truth: sometimes the most dangerous person can also be the most effective ally. Honestly, when I look at Diane's choice here, I can't help feeling a very real chill. It's the moment someone accepts that pride in history might have to be sacrificed, just to regain a fragile sense of control before the next disaster arrives. Phyllis, riding the high of her win against Victor, was gloating, but she was never careless. Victory never satisfies her for long. She always digs deeper, hunting for more leverage, more information, more ways to secure her position. When Diane appeared with the idea of an alliance, Phyllis's initial surprise quickly hardened into the cold calculation she's known for. She saw immediately that this wasn't only a chance to pressure Jabot, was also a door into Jabot's internal secrets, especially anything connected to Matt Clark or Kane. Diane understood exactly what she was risking. Offering Phyllis inside information was like placing a sharpened blade into the hand of someone who had cut her before. But Diane's fear of Victor, of his continued damage, of his ability to keep Jack trapped in hesitation, overpowered everything else. The deal formed in silence and mutual suspicion. Diane wanted Phyllis to act as a catalyst, to push Jack to the edge until he had no choice but to move decisively against Victor Newman. In return, Diane would feed Phyllis the kind of internal details she always craved. For Phyllis, it was a thrilling gamble, a way to satisfy her ambition while expanding her influence inside a war that was becoming more complicated by the hour. Two women who had spent so long on opposite sides now agreed reluctantly, a secret partnership, each carrying her own doubts and hidden motives that neither would ever say out loud. From the very first moment, the alliance smelled of risk and betrayal. They mapped out their initial steps, applying pressure on Jack, while quietly tracking Victor like two people walking a tightrope, fully aware that one small misstep could send them crashing down. And I can't pretend I don't feel a low, persistent sadness when I imagine Diane in this moment. It's the sadness of someone pushed so far that she chooses what she once despised, not out of ambition but out of fear of losing everything. That contradiction bent right and wrong. Necessity and danger makes this secret alliance feel heavier than any scheme before it. As if even while they move forward, neither truly believes this path will end in anything clean or whole.